Moscovitz's point here is basically if there's nothing to see there, then why is there so much opposition to this? Like he says, the ghosts of Christmas past come out whenever we're going to sign a new, basically when the UAP Disclosure Act goes through. So in your article, Richard, you seemed optimistic. It sounded like this is the closest we've ever been in your decades researching this topic. This is the closest we've been, but it seems like you're still concerned about the whole issue at large. What's your general take?
Yeah, I don't know many people who've called me optimistic about much. So, but I would say that's true that in terms of let's call it the disclosure movement, that, I call it the insurgency. I think that's a good word for these people. I think they're closer to actually having a genuine breakthrough in public recognition of UAP or UFO than we've ever been. I mean, we've already kind of made a breakthrough, as it were, where we've already had now for the last 6 years or 5 years and change. The Pentagon has acknowledged that, yes, there are these UAP. So that's kind of an important thing. We don't have a statement from the president. We have nothing like that. We don't have a statement that these are definitely extraterrestrial, but we do have at least an acknowledgement that there's something going on that is not being explained conventionally. So that's progress. And then with that in mind, these members of Congress have, I think, done a very commendable job, frankly, in trying to push this matter forward and getting yet more clarity and transparency. That's the word we like to use these days on this. So all of that is good. And I, like you, I thought Moskovitz sounded very good. I thought so did Tim Burchett, so did Anna Luna. She sounded very good there. But what are they all talking about? They're talking about stonewalling from the military establishment. This is an old story. And although I do think we are closer to getting a genuine, let's say, disclosure, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. There are many, many obstacles in the way. It's exciting. I mean, honestly, this is the time to get some popcorn and get a front row seat if you're not involved in the fight itself. It could go either way, but there's definitely a lot of pressure on the other side. 30 years ago, almost exactly, there was a similar fight going on behind the scenes regarding Roswell back then. There was a representative from the state of New Mexico, Stephen Schiff, who had constituents who said, hey, can you look into Roswell for us? And he did. This is in 1993, 94. And he got stonewalled beyond belief from the Pentagon. There are lots of stories about that, but it was really egregious. And he didn't get what he wanted. They hid all the records of Roswell. They were clearly siphoned out, taken out. And the Air Force and the military won on that one. So this is an old game. And even that wasn't the first time that Congress went head to head with the military over UFOs. This goes back to the 1950s and early 60s, frankly. So it's been a long-standing battle. And the reasons that the military have are very obvious. I mean, Moskowitz is saying something that I think is great for public relations. He's like, well, if they've got nothing to hide, why are they stonewalling us? Why are they being so difficult? But of course, he knows, and everybody knows, that they have a lot to hide. Like, this is the great delicacy in our public conversation, where still those people are not really allowed to state the obvious. So we have to do this little dance, play a little game of pretend, and act as if everyone is working in good faith here, when we know that the Pentagon is not acting in good faith. How can they possibly? They are trying to hide something with every bit of strength that they have. They're trying to hang on to the technology, which is of incalculable value. And there's no way that they're just going to say to the world, oh, yes, we've got these metamaterials that are fabricated down to the angstrom level that do really amazing things that we still are trying to figure. They will never voluntarily give that information up. It's too valuable. They're not going to do it. Just like in the 1940s, it was too valuable. Well, it's still too valuable today. So that's one thing. They don't want this to go to the Chinese or the Russians or anybody else. And then the other thing is, when this starts to come out, like, there's no such thing as a simple disclosure. Like, it doesn't work that way. I've had friends in this field who've said, look, all that you need is a statement from the president to say that it's real. That's disclosure. What's so hard about that? Well, there's a lot that's hard about that from their point of view. You can't just say, yes, UFOs are real and we think they're extraterrestrial. And then what do? Do you walk away and go on a 6-month vacation? You probably would like to, but there's be a lot of questions that are going to be followed up, which is like one is, so have you studied this technology and how far have you gone with it? Have you had these encounters? Has your military had encounters with these objects that have actually interfered with the operation of your nuclear weapons? Or, as I'm looking now with a project I'm doing on USOs, the U.S. Navy's battleships have, on many cases, been severely impacted by these objects. I cannot imagine a scenario in which the Pentagon would voluntarily say, "Oh yes, this is all happening." And on top of that, one thing I argued, I did this in my last YouTube video from a couple of days ago, but I repurposed that and rewrote it as an article published today on my website. I just said there's another reason, which is destabilization. We really underestimate how revolutionary this subject is. And I understand, we've got members of Congress, everyone's trying to position themselves to be able to get the crowbar inside and lift this thing up. And so we use, different kinds of language that are appropriate for the moment. But the fact is, everybody needs to understand you can't just disclose a little bit. It's not going to work like that. It's not like, we joke, you can't be, someone can't be half pregnant. Well, I don't think you can half disclose, because once you get past the red line being we admit it's extraterrestrials, and yes, we've got their stuff and their bodies. That's the red line. When you get to that line, it becomes an avalanche. And the U.S. empire, if we can talk about this, I discussed this at length in my article. The U.S. empire is in bad shape. It's over, way overcommitment militarily around the world. A lot of arrogance in U.S. diplomacy over the last several decades. A lot of bad diplomacy. A lot of financial problems. Things do not look good for U.S. empire builders and the neocons who are running U.S. policy. And make no mistake, these would be the exact people overseeing a disclosure. And, things are bad enough. So I don't think that they are interested. And plus, in an era where we're looking at an AI revolution that's threatening to displace how much of the workforce? We don't know, a lot. In which the wars that the U.S. Washington, they're on the losing side of all the major wars that they're sponsoring here. And the economy is not looking good. And we've got an election coming in the next year, in which you can see the country is about to go crazy. So that is not a situation where you're going to have a reasonable, calm, controlled UAP disclosure. Like, that is just not likely. So is the military going to stonewall? Hell yes, they're going to stonewall, as will the defense contractors, who are undoubtedly terrified over the clause in the UAP Disclosure Act that states, that talks about eminent domain. You have all these members of Congress and the Senate talking about potential eminent domain. That is, we're going to confiscate technology that these defense contractors may have that is related to UAP. Well, can you imagine the terror that is going on behind the scenes over this? So the pushback that these members of Congress are discussing, we should be shocked if that were not happening. So we're looking at a real battle behind the scenes. This is coming to a head. This battle has been building for several years. And
is this from Eric Davis? Do you think that's kind of when it started? It sounds like Eric Davis.
Well,
what was that? 95, I believe.
Okay. So when Eric Davis met with Admiral Thomas Wilson, that was in 2002. So Thomas Wilson was deputy chair of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs back in the late 90s during the presidency of Bill Clinton. And I don't want to get too bogged down here, but it is useful to know in 1997, Dr. Stephen Greer was, I guess you could say, making the rounds in D.C. with some people and trying to speak to leading members of the government. And he actually did have a meeting with Admiral Thomas Wilson and talked about various matters. I think he talked about Philip Corso, which was a new book at the time, The Day After Roswell, and other things, but also gave Wilson to understand that there were special access programs within the Pentagon that dealt with this exact issue, that dealt with alien technology and perhaps more. And Wilson did look into it. I knew this. I was very much involved in researching this for many years before this came out. I talked about it. And he was denied access. Wilson was denied access. This is a man who was running intelligence for the Joint Chiefs, and they just basically told him to take a long walk off a short pier. He threatened to complain. They said, go right ahead. These were defense contractors. Most people think maybe Lockheed, but we don't really know. But they were not afraid of him. So 5 years later, after Wilson retired, he was able to get a meeting with Eric Davis, and basically the crowd connected to Robert Bigelow. You're talking about Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, Colm Kelleher, John Alexander, Dr. Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14, and all of these folks, and Eric Davis. And they got Davis to interview Wilson for a little over an hour. Eric Davis took copious notes, and that came out in 2019. But yeah, I mean, I think that is a very good. It's important for us to understand that, because those notes, that conversation, gives us a nice look into the structure of secrecy that we typically don't get when we're looking into the UAP cover-up, the UFO cover-up. So that gave us some insight into it. Also, I think, Eric Davis factors into this again, because I think it was in 2019 that Chris Mellon, behind the scenes, was able to get Eric Davis to brief these members of Congress and maybe some senators on crash retrievals and acquisitions. I'm not sure they're all crash retrievals. There's talk that they're acquisitions that were not just crashes, but in perfectly intact craft. But that Davis gave a very powerful briefing to these members of Congress. And in fact, that was discussed in a 2020 article in the New York Times by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. They talked a little bit about this. So Eric Davis has been very important behind the scenes in getting congressional interest kind of revved up on this matter.
And what is your take? It seems like it reminds me, I lived in Spain for a while, and in Spain, they dub over all the movies. And it's actually the same actors in every movie that you watch in Spain. It's like the same voice actors. And you start recognizing their voices because trying to learn Spanish, and it's the same people. And I kind of get that feeling in the UFO community, and it's like these same people tend to keep coming up again and again. Travis Taylor, it turns out he was on the UAP task force.
Yeah.
It turns out Eric Davis was also on the UAP task force. And then you go back the D-Rids, Eric Davis has written a lot of those. You also have James Lukatsky, right? He has his second book coming out. What is your take on these characters? And they're all just very interesting people in their own sense. Yeah. But after so many years, you've seen all these people through so many years. What is your take on this small, tight-knit group, I guess, of people? Do you trust them, I guess?
Well, they are the invisible college. Jacques Vallée, who's also part of that crowd. Vallée is one of their friends too. He wrote a book back in the 70s called The Invisible College. And, it's funny because that's a real thing. These are folks who, not all of the current crop go back 40 plus years engaged in this, but some of them do. Some of them go back even more. What you see is that there's been this group of individuals very quietly, mostly with security clearances, who have clearly over many years had a strong interest in the UFO subject. We're talking people back in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, comparatively, it's like the Dark Ages. It's like the early medieval period for UFOs, in a sense, compared with what we have today, when in the culture it was impossible, really, to talk about UFOs without getting a smirk or a sneer or uh,
I
or
have to
being
commend you
dismissed.
guys too. I mean, that is really amazing. Just courageous against all of society. Because when I started talking about it, I felt very like I was breaking a taboo. I remember Martin Willis called me right after I made a few videos about the UAP topic,
Mm.
and his podcast is called That UFO Podcast, or sorry, it's a UFO podcast interviews. And I remember thinking, am I going to make this leap? Am I going to make that decision to be in the UFO world?
Yeah.
And that was in 2019. I can't imagine back in 1980s. If you're out publishing books,
Yeah, I mean,
et
that's
cetera.
even before my time. I got
Yeah,
involved in the early 90s,
yeah,
when it was still like, you'd have a UFO book and you'd shout, "Don't look at me," to other people. "Stay away. I'm just reading this on my own." I had to keep it, I was in the academic world in the early 90s, and for about a year and a half, I would go in, sneaking in UFO books to the library. It's kind of funny. But yeah, it was even more so in the 70s and 80s, without a doubt. And but to answer to at least deal with your question, do I trust them? I mean, I always say, look, you don't trust anybody. Never trust anybody. What you have to do is you fact check. So if that's what you do. You check the data. I always find it frustrating when people say to me, well, that's great, Mr. Dolan. I trust your work. Or I'm like, don't trust my work. Check my work. Check everybody's work. Um, and if someone is speaking the truth, or if they appear to be telling the truth, well, that's good. Do they have a track record of telling the truth? Well, I know a few of the people in that crew, of that general crowd. I've known Dr. Hal Puthoff for more than 20 years. And I will say that, yes, I trust him. I think he's honest. Does he tell me everything that he knows? Absolutely not. That is a man who plays his cards very close to his chest most of the time, and he will not say anything that he does not want to say. I know that from long years of experience. But I don't think he's ever deceived me, ever. And I don't think he's ever lied to me. And I would say the same about the other individuals that I've had interactions with there. Christopher Mellon, Lou Elizondo. I've never had anything negative in my interactions with them. I've never found them to say anything that I thought was untrue publicly. I may have a different perspective than some of these people, but that doesn't mean that I think they're untruthful. So, the real question that we're probably asking is, are they part of a larger nefarious op? Because you hear this every now and then, like a disclosure op, a false flag, or something like that. Or are they legit? Are they actually trying to make some kind of breakthrough in our public conversation? And I definitely think it's the latter. When I, look at all of their history, I think Chris Mellon, I mean, these are all establishment-oriented people, and much more than I am. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a general desire for some level of disclosure. I think they do. I don't know if they have a desire for full disclosure for everything. I somehow doubt it. But I think they do want some. And there's a lot of reasons that people might want this. My biggest suspicion, and this is just me guessing, is that in the defense industry, I assume that it's probably widely understood that this phenomenon is real. How long can this be kept under wraps, and where we just continue to pretend that it's not there, when Boeing and Lockheed and Raytheon and SAIC and who knows who else are probably dealing with this at a deep level? I think word's going to get around. So what's the story? I will bet that there's probably a lot of competitors in the community there who want in. Maybe they want in. Maybe they want a piece of the pie. A lot of this always comes down to money. I think there's probably very good money involved in this, and it could be something as simple as that. And they just want to open their conversation a little bit more so they can position themselves, perhaps. I don't know, but I do think, just judging by their statements, again, I think of Elizondo, I think of Chris Mellon, I think of Puthoff. any of the others, even Colm Keller and James Lukatsky, who I listened to their interview on Weaponized about a month or two ago. I don't think that they were particularly forthcoming, but I don't know that they were deceptive. So,
yeah, you mentioned in your article as well, is I think a main point of it was what's missing from our current discourse is the history of disclosure, and namely that it's been going on for 80 years, and there is a huge cover-up that's been actively going on.
Well, yeah, the history of the phenomenon, not just of disclosure. I mean, you think of it this way, since 2017, when we learned about the Tic Tac UFO incident of the Nimitz battle group, in 2004. Now, that case understandably received a tremendous amount of attention. It needed to. It's a genuinely outstanding case. It's not the best case. There are definitely better cases even than that in terms of drama with the military's encounters with UAP. But that's a really good one, and it's good that we've talked about it. But of course, what has happened is that to the extent that the mainstream even discusses this, or the Pentagon ever discusses it, the entire 20th century is just forgotten. It's as if it never happened.
Yeah.
And you get this sense from them that all of this is new, like that they're thinking, yes, these UAP. Well, apparently there are these UAP out there. Like it's almost like that. And they're stating things like, well, we are going to look into this. Now, I'm sitting back looking at that, calling BS, because that's just absolutely a load of steaming BS. How can anyone take that seriously? They have been dealing with this phenomenon on a military basis since the 1940s, provably. We've got a stack of documents released through Freedom of Information that they don't hint, they don't suggest, they prove that the U.S. military has had exceptionally dramatic encounters with these inexplicable objects.
You mentioned that we've had many encounters. Can you just, off the top of your head, I guess, the most dramatic or one of the most dramatic?
Okay, off the top of my head, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I remember years ago, George Norrie on Coast to Coast said, "Richard, what do you believe is the best UFO case?" I'm trying to do George's voice, probably not well. At the time, I threw out the 1976 Iranian UFO encounter. That was in September. That wasn't U.S. military. That was Iranian Royal Air Force, although the U.S. intelligence was all over that case. We know this for a fact. That's a heck of a case where you have two Iranian F-4s in succession encountering a very large object over the city of Tehran that detached a smaller object that went on an intercept course with them and actually disabled their missile system and disabled their electronics and I think avionics and whatever, so that they had to do emergency turn to get away. That's a very good and well-documented case. You go back further, there's just so many. I remember reading one from the summer of 1950 dealing with incursions over the Hanford nuclear facility in the state of Washington. They manufactured plutonium there for many years. Very toxic site. Not surprisingly, there were lots of UFOs hanging out over the Hanford facility in 1949, 1950. We have a document, an Army document in this case, talking about these objects round in form, multiple objects that have been seen over the Hanford plant. Air Force jets attempted intercept with negative results, we're told. Anti-aircraft battalions were alerted. Fighters are on alert. The FBI was notified. All of this, the Atomic Energy Commission, that's the predecessor of the DOE. You have all of this, and it was just a classified document at the time in 1950. Obviously, things were going on that were important. At the same time, in the late 40s, over the state of New Mexico, you had something known as the green fireballs. And this was a very significant series of events over primarily near Los Alamos National Labs, but other areas in New Mexico where objects were low, maneuvering. They were clearly not meteorites. They got the attention of the highest level national security scientists and military people. And I mean, officially, I don't think they really made a determination, but they did triangulate these things. And on at least one occasion in 1950, they tracked it at 100,000 feet altitude, moving at multiple thousands of miles per hour, and it had a diameter, I think they said, of 30 feet. So whatever that was. There's just so many. One could go on and on. This is how I've spent most of my years looking at these military cases.
You mentioned nukes as well.
Yeah.
Just one mention there, and there was, I believe, two senators, I think, congressmen mentioned nukes here. Moskovitz mentioned it, and every 5 years, I guess, Bob Salas has been going to DC. Do you see that coming next year? We'll get more info on the nuclear angle, or do you think that's all kept behind closed doors?
That's a really good question, Chris. Yes, I've heard the same rumors that there's more witnesses coming forward. Some of these, I hope not all, but some of them may be some of these nuclear witnesses from the 1960s. I say I hope not all because I would like for there to be some fresh whistleblowers who have some new accounts that we have not heard. But the nuclear UFO incidents are important. Famously, the Malmstrom Air Force Base event from 1967 is what Bob Salas was involved in, and that was quite significant. You had an object over, I think, 2 different launch control facilities there that were argued to have shut down a variety of missiles. These are all separately wired missiles, like they were not connected to each other. They should not all have gone down. Boeing looked into it. They could not find a conventional explanation. It's a really heck of a good testimony and account. The year before, by the way, was an amazing event over at Minot Air Force Base, where there was also nuclear weapons, and also a strike team was sent to investigate an object that was hovering right either on the ground or right over the ground. And they actually refused. Once they saw it, they wouldn't go any closer. It disrupted their radio when they got to within a certain distance. They watched it ascend. It was tracked by NORAD up to 100,000 feet altitude, and it was just gone. There's a long, long history of this. And I have no doubt there's much more. The researcher, Robert Hastings, who wrote the excellent book called UFOs and Nukes, he points out there's a lot more than just the 1960s events. They go right through the 70s and 80s. It's quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm about a third through that book. I just started it. And interesting, at the beginning, he talks about the UAP seen during all the nuclear tests, the thermonuclear tests out in the Pacific. Yes. It was quite interesting before all those giant tests and after. He has found, records of, and met people actually giving testimony to saying they saw tic-tac shaped UAPs before these giant blasts and after them.
I spoke to one such witness as well. And that was in relation to something in the early 60s. You can look this up on Wikipedia, something called Operation Dominic, where I think from April to October of 1962, the U.S. detonated, I think it was 36 high-yield nuclear devices in the upper atmosphere over the Pacific, off about 500 miles off the coast of Hawaii. And this man was there. And one thing he said to me is that every time before a detonation, they had bogeys in the upper atmosphere that were always there. He said every single time, like clockwork. And he said they would always wink out just before a detonation, except on one occasion. It was fascinating. Apparently one of the craft, I believe this man totally, one of the craft came down. It did not get out of range. And he was brought up from below deck, because when they're doing the detonations, everyone has to get below deck in the ship. Makes sense, right? You wouldn't want to be above for that. But they were told to, him and a few other people said, you come up right now, stand over here, face all, they're like all the sea sprays coming at them. They're looking out, and their job was simply to look forward, to be a witness. I don't know why. He didn't know why. And he said, we watched this object zoom horizontally across their field of vision before it went into the water. And he was talking with some of the radar folks. He was doing cross training there, and just said, oh yeah, they were tracking this. This was a bogey that was from the nuclear detonation that did not escape. And it went down, and there was a failed recovery of that craft, according to what he said. How about that? just one of like countless stories that are floating around out there. Like I know there are so many of these.
Hmm.
These military guys, a lot of the ex-Navy particularly, have just incredible accounts that they are just sitting on.
And I guess, do you think this time is going to be any different? You know, how is this disclosure going?
Well, there are a lot of differences,
Yeah.
many. The secrecy group, it's a phrase I like to use these days. They have not really changed in their motivations. They have every bit the same motivation for keeping this subject quiet as they always have. There is nothing that I can see where that can be gained for them by disclosing this phenomenon. Honestly, I don't see that they have any advantage. So they're going to continue to obstruct, I feel, for as long as possible. The difference is that, well, there's a lot of new variables. So one is we've got the internet. We didn't have the internet, 20 plus 30 years ago. And we're able on our side to have a much more open conversation about this and to engage many more people. I strongly suspect that this push in Congress wouldn't be happening if we didn't have an internet. It would be a lot easier to keep this all very quiet. So there's a lot of pressure coming from our society as a whole that I think is contributing to this being discussed now. So the real question is, how far can it go before you get to the point of no return?
Yeah, you mentioned that was the bodies, right? You said your red line is basically mention of evidence, hard evidence, craft, and bodies. So has that been crossed, or will we get there next year?
But they're standing right on the end, right on the end of the line there. I mean, Eric Davis nearly went over that line a couple of times, but he didn't. And no one actually has. The New York Times piece from 2020 by Leslie and Ralph came very close, very, very, very close. But they also didn't step over the line.
Yeah, Leslie Kane. Yeah, in one of our interviews, she said that they took it out actually because she couldn't verify it, I guess, to the standards. If I remember.
Yeah, well, to the New York Times editorial policy, I have no doubt. But anyway, no one's gone over that line. So it is the red line. The reason it's the red line is because to state that the U.S. government or military has bodies and or alien tech, that's a red line because that implicates them in a lie. It implicates the U.S. government in deception, which it doesn't want to do. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem from a PR point of view from the U.S. government. I mean, the technology itself is a problem, but from a PR point of view, the U.S. government always tries to paint itself as, pure as the driven snow, which of course it's exactly the opposite. It's the diabolical fire starter of the world. But the U.S. policy is to tell the world we're the good guys, we wear the white hats, and so it's not a good look for the United States to say, well, yeah, you remember all those conspiracies we told you not to believe? Well, keep on not believing them. But the UFO one, the biggest one of all time, yeah, that one is true. We lied for 80 years. Like, that is not a good look. So there's not a motivation for them to want to push this forward. But we're living in a very explosive time of change, and things are up in the air. And I don't personally know where they're going to land. One real wild card that can happen, and this is why, if one wants to be optimistic, it would be the possibility of further hearings. Like, I don't put a lot of stake in the UAP Disclosure Act per se. My take on that is that there are enough loopholes in it to enable it to be much weaker than we want to think. But hearings are a different matter. I mean, we saw what happened when David Grush basically said what he said last July. I mean, yeah, David Fravor and Ryan Graves were there too, and they were both very excellent, but it was Grush who really had the bombshell statement. So, we know that 30, 40 people, maybe more, have been interviewed behind the scenes who have, from at least what the rumor mill is telling me, I don't have confirmation, that a number of these individuals are even more explosive than David Grush. So if that's true, well, where will that leave us if they actually are able to testify to the Senate or the House? Doesn't even matter, to a live session, and they are able to put some of these apparent bombshell statements out? Where will that take us? That's really the question that I have, and I think that's the best chance for moving this issue forward is more hearings,
And
if
that's
Congress can do it.
and the Schumer Act does give subpoena power
Yes,
to these Congress.
that's
Excellent.
right. That's the one, because when you read the details of that act, and most of it is like when they deal with the contractors, private defense contractors, it's like we would encourage private contractors to tell us about their technology, but there's not a lot of coercive language in there. But the power to subpoena is, that's in there. So there are definitely things in there that would make them uncomfortable. That they're
if is the eminent domain also, I mean, that seems like it would scare the defense contractors. Just from my outside impression, it seems like that's kind of what happened. Is they freaked out and they called Mike Rogers to try and stop that.
It looks like it.
Yeah, I don't.
That's what it looks like.
Total speculation. And then Gates says he came in defense of Rogers. He never came in defense of Mike Turner, though. So it seems like Mike Turner has not been defended by anyone. But Gates here says that Rogers helped them get information, and he's on the side of transparency.
I heard that too.
Money. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. We'll have to just find out.
Yeah, it seems like, because like you mentioned, is now we have technology like this decentralized media. The audio is terrible on all these streams, but there's multiple streams from this meeting. Luna just streamed it direct to her X account. So it seems like, yeah, she just streamed it. She said, we're going to stream it. And then she just had someone she knows or one of her aides, recording on his cell phone. We could hear him actually whispering. They were whispering in the crowd. But to me, it just seems like this is decentralized media. And it seems like everywhere we're kind of just, the curtains are kind of just pulling back. It's almost like they're just getting degraded. Like we can see through a lot of the
It's true. That's true. But here, I mean, think about how crazy this situation is. 13 years ago, I co-authored a book called After Disclosure. So it's still, I think, the only book-length treatment of disclosure. Like, how might it happen? And if it happened, how would it rock our world? Like, that's the book. And we wrote it back in 2010. And I have to say, like, back in 2010, if I were to have a vision of all of the things that have been said starting in 2017, I would have thought, okay, this would absolutely prompt an absolute no holds barred disclosure. There'd be no choice. I mean, the fact that the ATIP program was outed, in 2017, the fact that the Tic Tac UFO encounter gets coverage in the New York Times, the fact that the Navy in the aftermath acknowledged that they have UAP reporting procedures. Like, but if it had been 2010 or earlier and that news had come out, that would have totally blown us all away. And I would have expected some kind of significant disclosure to happen. But what did happen? Nothing happened. We're in a situation where this is all out, and people are still walking this little fine line. Like, no one is actually going out there and saying, yeah, it's aliens. Like, no one's doing that. Are they afraid? They don't want to be the first one to do it. It's the obvious fact that is staring us in the face. There's an intelligence behind this phenomenon. It is not us. They are all over the world, by the way. They're not just, in certain parts of the U.S. military complex. They are everywhere, every day, every single day. And one of the things that I think the UFO or UAP research field needs to do a lot more is ask, what the hell is going on with all of this activity around the world every single day? What are they doing? Like, we need to get a handle on the quantity, which is difficult, but I've been trying to
Yeah, you
get a
mentioned
handle
that
on
in
it.
your article. You said the number, you call it conservative, at 50,000
Yep,
observations per year
I think so. I think
worldwide.
50,000 sightings a year is conservative. Yes, I do. Because I try to extrapolate out. I mean, we do not have good or even adequate UFO, UAP data. I mean, we just don't. In North America, there are two very large databases that take sightings. One is the MUFON database, the Mutual UFO Network, which is not public knowledge. I mean, you have to be a MUFON investigator to get access to that. And then the other, which is total public access, is the National UFO Reporting Center. Now, each of those get more than 5,000 sightings a year, raw reports. On top of that, Chris Rutkowski up in Canada, in Manitoba, collects another, I think, about 2,000, mostly Canadian sightings a year. So that's 12,000. Not a lot of overlap, by the way. So let's just say 10,000 in North America every year. Now, how many are good sightings? Is it, 5%? Less? Let's say 5%. So that gives you 500 good sightings a year. And actually, it's more than that are very good in my view. But then you have to ask, how many people see a UFO and never report it? Every time I speak publicly, every single time I'm out in a group, I always ask, who's seen a UFO? And up go the hands. And then I say, okay, now only keep your hand up if you've actually reported your UFO. And nearly all the hands go down. And that's at a UFO conference where you would think people are more motivated to report these. The fact is, most people don't report their sightings. So now you do what? Multiply by another 10. So you go from 500 to 5,000 good ones a year in North America. But North America is only 5% of the world's population. US and Canada are only less than 5%. So, I mean, if you assume that sightings are more or less spread evenly around the world, well, there's 95% of the world that's not being included here. So you multiply by 20 if you want. I mean, you can come up with some very high numbers here. That would give you 100,000 sightings a year. And I don't think that's outrageous.
Yeah, that would, so 50,000 sightings a year, that'd be 137 a day. So that's around 5.7 an hour. So you're looking at worldwide 6 sightings an hour on the low end.
I think so. I actually think that's probably right. We don't know because most of the world has a barely functioning or absent infrastructure for reporting UFOs. I mean, if you live in, I don't know, Thailand, the only place you can go really is the National UFO Reporting Center if you speak English. Like or if you're in, Central Africa, or if you're in China, like where do those reports go? The Chinese might have a system, but in fact, I think they do, but I don't have access to that. So most of the world, we're not really sharing our data. And so we're just playing guesswork here. But there's clearly a lot going on that's not being discussed.
Excellent. And you asked, well, one more question, and then we'll start getting to the audience questions here. Yeah, you basically in your article, and I just drew total blank, man. It's 11:45 here. I got it. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so basically, you and I get this feeling that there a chance that we open all the doors, because what it feels like is underground. There's like this big secret vault, and there's humans pointing the guns at us, and we can't get in. Right? Congress is trying to get. They're trying to get in. They're saying right here, can we get in? And no one's letting them in. Right? Do you have keys?
Right.
What is the chance we open that door and it's the phenomenon back there? It's actually led by this global system. You mentioned, how can we have 50,000 observations a day? What is your inclination that the humans aren't running the show?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. I wonder about this every single day. I wonder every day. I don't know what the truth is. But if you are a responsible individual charged with doing, let's say, counterintelligence on behalf of your species, let's just say, you would have to be asking this question. You would be negligent in the extreme if you were not. I've come across a number of witnesses over the years who have spoken to me very credibly, in my view, about human-looking entities that were not human to them or didn't seem like they were from around here, as it were. Are they walking among us? That was the title by a book by Dr. David Jacobs, his last book, Walking Among Us, about human-looking hybrids being infiltrated into our society. Well, it could be a lot more than that, frankly. It doesn't have to be human-looking hybrids. It could be beings that are grown to be human. I mean, they've presumably they might have pretty good genetic capabilities. They could grow their own human beings. I don't know how they do it. But you'd have to ask, is there collaboration? There have always been claims going back for decades and decades by different individuals that there has been communication between us and them. None of it's been proven. I don't know for a fact that it's true, but some of the claims have struck me as plausible and entirely possible. So it's something to ask. I mean, we are a species right now in the midst of the greatest revolution to our existence, probably since we discovered fire. Right now, we're actually becoming. We don't hear talk about transhumanism for no reason. We are literally talking about transforming the human species, for goodness sake, into something. Who the heck knows what we're going to turn ourselves into another century from now? But you just combine strong AI, combine advanced CRISPR technology and beyond, the ability to do gene editing. Well, let your imagination run wild. We're turning ourselves into something different right now. At the time, we're getting things like quantum computing and ultra strong AI, singularity level, probably in another decade or less, who knows? So we're moving into something that's going to utterly transform all of human civilization. No one's really having a proper appreciation of this, in my view. At a time when massive numbers, in my view, I think massive numbers of non-human intelligences are here now, probably to watch this show. This is the transformation. The greatest show probably in the quadrant of this galaxy at this time is probably us. We're going through the gauntlet, and they're here to watch. Maybe they're here to monitor. Maybe they're here to guide. Maybe they're here to control it, this process. I mean, a century ago, we could not really do anything that would be considered dangerous to them. I don't know that that's true anymore. Our development is moving exponentially, and we're not done with this exponential growth, and that includes weaponry. That includes data crunching, communications. Our capabilities actually collectively as a species are quite formidable. I think a lot of researchers make a mistake when they say things like, oh, we're so primitive. How could they possibly have any interest in us? I think they're really not seeing this very clearly. We're not that primitive anymore. We've got some very, very advanced science and technology, and there's probably a lot more ahead of us that can make us a nuisance to who knows who.
I guess personally, I am just recently very optimistic on actually the future. I know that sounds
I'm glad someone needs to be.
Quite depressing now. No, if you look, actually, I'm a huge fan of Tony Seba. Have you heard of him? Tony Seba?
No, actually.
Yeah, I'd recommend you check out. He has this thing called transformation. He was 10 years ago in 2010. He called the declining cost curve of electric cars and batteries. And in 2010, he called basically to the dollar how much an electric vehicle would cost. And it's all based on battery curves. And so now that was in 2010. So he has a good history. And now he's saying that within 10 years, basically everything's going to be free, essentially. I know it sounds insane, but everything's going.
Does he have a source of energy that's going to provide this?
Yeah, it's solar, wind, and batteries. It's already happened.
Okay, so that sounds like a fairy tale to me, but we'll have to come back and discuss this at greater length.
We will, yeah, we will. Yeah, I would definitely check that out. I think, yeah, it's in my view, it's definitely going to happen. It's already there. Yeah, if you look at China,
that is not a prediction that I would make. But
Exactly.
but hey,
And I honestly, I didn't think it would happen. Like I said, I'm quite optimistic, and it's just changed recently. And that's the big technology, and I encourage you to look it up. But it's true. Australia is already at 100% or over 90% renewable energy. The one I didn't consider, if you can check this out, is called precision fermentation. Precision fermentation, and what this
yeah,
is basically you use microbes. It's fermentation, but now instead of fermenting alcohol, what we do is now we can ferment anything essentially. In the 90s, they used it to do insulin. So before the 90s, you'd have to kill 50,000 cows basically to make, I think it's 5 kilos of insulin. It was very expensive. And then what they
wow,
did is now they can ferment through precision fermentation. You can ferment insulin. That was in the 90s. So it dropped the price of insulin, 100-fold. So that's just happened now with dairy products. So casein and whey, your basic elements of dairy can all be precision fermented. That means no animals. You don't need any agriculture. So all of that land now is you don't need it. So effectively, if you think about it, we basically enslaved and domesticated the animal, the cow necessarily, to get our food, right?
exactly.
Now what we've done is we've genetically enslaved the microbes at the micro level to actually create the exact molecules that we need. And all you need really for precision fermentation is the molecule, the genetically engineered, yeast or whatever, and sugar, and like these vats. So I didn't know about that. That's why I'm taking a lot of time here.
No, that
But
sounds like a really good breakthrough. I don't know if that's just going to turn our world into a utopia.
Yeah,
We
I don't know
women,
if it will. It kind of reminds me of Soylent Green, etc. But it will drastically reduce the climate requirement, and it's going to happen. It's already going to happen because of price. It's 1/10. It's less than 1/10 the price, so it's going to happen.
Any positive step is obviously going to be very welcome. If 3D printed food is another thing around the corner, if they can make a steak that's very, very tasty, 3D printed, right now my attitude is I don't want it, but if it tastes good enough and if it's got the nutrition, what do I know?
Well, and I'll just finish with that's my hope is that up until now we've evolved on this planet in a resource limited environment. It was essentially kill or be killed, right? If I don't get the resources, then you will, and I will die. So essentially, if you look at just how America is formulated, like you mentioned, fire starting these wars, I think it's just a natural evolution after World War II of the military-industrial complex, right? That's what we grew. Eisenhower warned us against it, and now we've just been chipping in dollars to this system that goes around to get resources. But what happens now when everything is going to freeness, right? If we talk about energy goes to free, you mentioned AI. If you think about it, intelligence right now is going to free. So if food costs also go to free, then would the world change now if we're not resource limited? That would
We're
be
getting into some philosophy here, and
Yeah.
I'll just say this. I'm just going to say this. So yes, like it's definitely something we would want to do to make our lives more abundant. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants more and better food. Everyone wants a better house. Everyone wants nicer gadgets and things. Absolutely. But here's the thing. We actually already have that world compared with our forebears of 100, 200, 500 years ago.
Yes.
And we're still not happy.
It's not
like
enough.
nothing ever makes us happy. Like, I'm a big fan of Dostoevsky. He's one of my favorite writers. And I like him because he knew that we are messed up. There's like, you give a man, you feed his belly, doesn't matter. He's going to find something to bitch about. We will always find something to be unhappy about. I believe it is deeply embedded in our nature. That's just me. That's my thought. So you can give us utopia, give us all the technology. We're still going to be greedy little pigs. We're still going to want more and more and more and more and more. It's going to like, we have abundance. Great. I want more abundance and I want more and I want more because my neighbor's got that. I want more. Like it's never going to stop. Never. We are the most greedy, insatiable. We can't help it. This is what I think. So you give us something, we'll just want more. That's what we're going
I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong.
I do too, but I suspect I'm not. but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's evolution. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, that's what I hope for. So let's get to some questions here. Thanks again, everybody, for being waiting patiently. This is a record, actually, Richard. 20,000. Oh, sorry, 20,000. 2,365 people. That's a record for.
Hey, I
for
want
a
to
live
thank
guest.
your crew. You've got a crew out there. I want to give my best to the Lato crew. Do you have a name for them? It's Lato Files.
Yeah, we have Lato Files or the UAP Society.
The UAP Society. I'm just giving my best.
Excellent.
Some of my people are here too, and I'm sure there's a lot of crossover.
I'm sure that helped. Yeah. So here's a question. Until you get tired, does Richard believe the abduction phenomena will ultimately tank the disclosure movement?
What a great, it's a really good question. No, I don't. I think it won't. I think that because I think I don't think abductions are what I call the red line. They're important, like really important. Abductions are very important. No one's talking about abductions right now. Even in the UFO, UAP research field, I don't hear too many people discussing abductions anymore. My wife, Tracy, and I still investigate this. And we both know these are still going on. Alien abductions are a real thing. And I'll say that until I can't say it anymore.
And they're still going on. I guess I was under the impression they're less now. Is that just incorrect?
Who really knows? Who's got the statistics on this? Tracy, in the last couple of years, spoke to a number of folks who, no, I think their experiences are still quite recent. We have a friend. I won't mention his name, but he's very upstanding, well-known person. No, he's still getting them. And I think he's credible. I think he's quite credible. So, but we don't know. We don't know how widespread it is. But will it be the thing that stops disclosure? I somehow doubt it. I think that it will, once we get past the red line of crash retrievals and confirmation of biologics, if we can use that phrase, then I think the barn doors open and everything's going to be discussed, including abductions will be another matter of discussion. I don't think abductions is going to be the thing that stops it.
All right, excellent. I've heard part of the reason that government, DOD, do not want disclosure to happen is that people will freak out when they hear about abductions. So another one on abductions. Yeah. Thanks, D-Stu, for all your support.
Well, I mean, there's definitely been a lot of of us wondering, all right, is the government keeping this back because they don't want the public to freak out? I mean, definitely you could see people freaking out. I have family, I've got relatives, you got relatives, we've all got a few relatives out there that we think that person's not going to handle this very well. Like there's a lot of that out there. And we've got neighbors, and I could imagine some of my neighbors as well. So I think people would not, but I don't believe that is the ultimate concern that the government has. I think the real concerns are institutional. In terms of like money, in terms of accountability, the secrecy of the programs, the disposition of the technology and all of that, I think is much higher on. And I think people will eventually learn to deal. I mean, look, if disclosure happens, you probably still have to go to work the next morning to your job. Like it's not like your life stops. So we still have to pay the bills. We still have families and responsibilities. But again, this question is dealing with abductions. That's part of it. I think people would just freak out in general with the reality that there's aliens, maybe gray aliens, like interacting on this planet. I think that would be enough to make a lot of people become upset, but we're going to have to deal with it. I mean, it's at some point, this is going to be out there, I have to think, and people will have to adjust.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Josh, for the super sticker. Appreciate it, everyone. Thanks, Bill, for the long-term support. All right, here we go. Bill Lacey question. CIA and USAP was created because of the non-human intelligence Earthling check back before it was created. Okay, I don't know. The USAP has been decidedly quiet.
They always have.
Yeah, what is the deal with the OSI and the Air Force? What is your take on that? Are they just so dirty? Are they so guilty that they just keep quiet?
Yeah, well, you go back. By the way, that question, I think I understand. I mean, CIA and the U.S. Air Force were both created in 1947 by the National Security Act. And that act was created, Roswell happened at that time. Kenneth Arnold happened at that time. Now, that act had been in the works before Roswell and before Kenneth Arnold. So the whole reorg of the old Department of War had been in the works since the end of World War II. But it did happen that they came out just as the whole flying saucer thing just like swept over the United States. And I have to think that they were quite aware of it. But anyway, you asked, like, what's up with the Air Force? They've been absolutely grimly silent on this subject forever. Back in the 50s, there was definitely a lot of talk about rivalry between the Air Force and the Navy over the UFO problem. In other words, we know this is true because they've been written about at length. But like when Navy personnel would have a UFO sighting back in the 40s or 50s, especially I think in the 50s, it happened on at least occasions that Air Force people would be flown into the Navy ship and would just essentially annoy all of the Navy people on board by the way they treated them as UFO witnesses. I think there was a lot of resentment, and that went right up the Navy chain of command. There's always been this tension, I think, between the services over this matter. So I wonder if that factors in. Over the years, I've spoken with a lot of Navy and a lot of Air Force personnel on this subject. And I just have to say, my own personal observation is that the Navy guys are way more interesting to talk to, way more forthcoming. I don't know what it is. The Air Force people that I have spoken to, they just tell me almost nothing. Like, yep. Yeah. And they're very grim. And so I think that there's something more deeply embedded in the culture, I'm guessing, of that service than in the Navy.
Well, the Air Force, we actually came out of the Army. It was the Army Air Force first. And I don't know, it seems like I did Navy training, initial Navy training, and the Air Force just seems more militant. It seems more Armyized, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
The
I nearly was going to join the Air Force.
More free willing. Yeah, you can tell by the the way our documents are written, right? The -1, the most important documents in the Air Force will be the -1, and in the Navy, it's the NATOPS. And in the Air Force version, it says exactly what you can do. And basically, it says exactly what you can't do. And the Navy one just says what you can do, essentially. What is legal? It doesn't, how can I describe, I'm saying it incorrectly. The Air Force writes exactly what you can't do, and the Navy basically reads it wide open. Yeah, the Navy reads it wide open.
Interesting.
I'm sorry. So the Navy says what you can't do, and the Air Force says this is what you can do. So you can only do what's in the Air Force documents. So that makes sense.
I see. Okay.
It has to be written in the Air Force documents, or you can't do it. The Navy just says, well, don't do this because someone died doing this, right? That's why when someone dies, the Navy writes it in, okay, don't do this, right? But everything else is basically free, up for grabs. But the Air Force, basically, you can only do this because we've tested it, we've proven this. That's the only method.
Yeah.
I think I finally got to it, but
slightly more robotic in how they treat their personnel. Sounds
it's
like
from the Army, if you can think of it that way. So
yeah. Interesting.
All right, here we go. This is about interactions. Grush briefly brushed alien government interactions with Rogan, but wouldn't say much. Is anything credible actually known about those interactions? I've met Puthoff. How much insider information about aliens does he know? So we covered Puthoff a little bit there, but on the interactions, I guess.
I can't and won't speak on behalf of Hal Puthoff on that matter. I just can't. But look, all of those people know that it's real and they're here. Every person in that crowd knows. They don't think, they don't suspect, they know it's real. In one form or another, they've known. In terms of the interactions, though, I am not aware, actually, of anyone in that, whether it's Grush or Puthoff or any of the others, about interactions with, I guess, By interactions, I'm thinking with a
Hmm.
live entity, if that's what is implied there. And I'm not aware of
It
any
seems like
such interaction.
agreements. Yeah, like anytime Rogan would ask about communication or
Yeah,
agreements with the others, essentially, that almost seems like the red line that he won't pass, right? Because you mentioned your red line is bodies
yeah.
and craft. It seems like Grush's red line is there any communication or agreements? Because when he gets pushed to that,
Perhaps
he
it's true.
doesn't
Yeah,
say.
that's a really good question. As you know, we were talking before. Is it possible that there is communication between our civilization and theirs? And I guess I would have to say yes. Of course, it's absolutely possible. It could be true. It could absolutely be true, and it wouldn't be illogical when you really think about it. It would actually be very logical. I know a species comes here from wherever they come. They know the path that we're going through right now. They know we just got nukes, we've got computers, we got internet. Like we're on the exponential path, right?
Hmm.
So they know, they probably are able to predict a lot of our development, very likely. And so they're going to be interested in us. And plus, this is Earth. This is like one of the greatest places in the universe. Like literally, we take it for granted. We think, oh, there's a lot of life out there. Well, I don't know how much life really. There's probably a lot of life, but are all the planets like Earth? The exoplanetary scientists are starting to come to the conclusion, like, no, this is a rare planet. They've identified, I think, 5,000 exoplanets up till now. I don't think any of them are like Earth. So how many are actually like these beautiful, pristine, abundant with life planets? Lots of water, all this genetic variety, like probably not many compared with everything that's out there. Maybe 1 out of 10,000, 1 out of 50,000. Okay, that still gives you a lot in the context of the galaxy, but it's still somewhat rare. So when you find a place like Earth, you might be thinking, this is a place we're going to make a base. We're going to make a base camp here. Lots of water. We need the water. Lots of other stuff. This, talk about a great grocery store. This is like the ultimate, you know, Whole Foods of the universe is Earth. So, so they would have reason for being here long term. Absolutely. And you know, finding their own proper avatars, their own biological methodology by which they'd be able to do that. You need you got to watch out for the microbes. Okay, well maybe we'll take humans and we'll genetically modify them for our purposes. I personally think that's probably what they've done. I kind of got a little off track there. Sorry, but
Yeah, I had one guy, a friend, he mentioned he thinks they interact with us through viruses. He thinks they give us viruses to interact with our genetics.
COVID, anyone? Who knows? Who knows what they did? I mean, look, you stay in this field long enough, talk to enough brilliant people, and all kinds of hypotheses come your way. And some of them may be true. Interacting with us through viruses, well, virus, I think, is the earliest form of proto-life on this planet, right? I think. So why not?
Here we have a few more questions from Secret Spaceship. Thank you. Was John Lear an Intel tool? Thanks, Richard and Chris.
I don't know. I didn't know. I met John Lear once or twice. I know a few things about him here and there. You know, back in the late 1980s. So John Lear was the son of William Lear, the inventor of the Learjet. Also, I think William Lear invented the 8-track tape, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of a cool thing. William Lear was a defense contractor, and he himself was a UFO witness. John Lear, his son, was an extremely qualified pilot. He had, I don't know how many qualifications he had, but lots, maybe a record. Did work for the CIA. We know this. He flew for the CIA. I don't know what his missions with the CIA were, but hey, we do know they were running drugs back in the 70s and 80s, and maybe, who knows what John Lear did with the CIA? I don't have the slightest idea. But he was certainly deep with certain elements of the intelligence community. And then he comes out in the late 1980s, and he starts talking about we made a deal with the aliens. John Lear, back in the late 80s, is one of the
Wow.
people who took the UFO community into the deep, deep, deep cover-up, along with Bill Cooper and John Lear, a couple of other folks. But Lear was really important in this. And he said, you know, it looks like we made a deal with them. Like they would abduct a few people here and there, and we would get access to their technology. And according to what Lear said, is my understanding is that the aliens broke the agreement and they're just abducting, doing whatever they want, and we have no ability to stop them. That is how the UFO world learned about John Lear in the late 1980s.
Wow.
And is that true? Is that an op? And, you know, ever since, I mean, John Lear, you know, he didn't stop there. He had a lot to say in the subsequent years. Some of the things he said struck me as kind of crazy, to be honest. You know, soul catchers on the moon and a lot of other activity on the moon that I don't think that I personally believed. But so I don't know. I can't say that I think he was an intel tool. He certainly knew people in the intelligence community. He was part of that community in some way and had some things to say that were they helpful or not helpful? If they were not helpful, then you could say maybe he was doing a kind of op to throw mud into the UFO field and make it more difficult. I don't know if that was his thing. I don't know.
He did a lot of research into implants, correct?
John, no, that's Dr. Roger Lear.
Okay. Thinking different one. Okay, I was like, wow, I didn't know Dr. Lear was into all that stuff. Okay.
Roger Lear, that's Lier. He did quite a few surgical removals, or in conjunction with other surgeons who were.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking Dr. Lear, but this is John Lear. Okay,
John Lear, different.
Yeah, I didn't know. There's
John
so
Lear, they both passed away now. Both of them are gone.
Okay, excellent. And well, thanks, Break Johnny Live. No question there. We don't know. Hopefully, it did happen. There was a question here on Michael Herrera. I'd love to hear Richard's take on the Herrera interview. Michael Herrera actually mentioned that they have implants. Each one of the supposed assets, you know, the people working in this program, they are supposedly all chipped, according to Michael's inside source. Just reminding me of the implants.
Yeah, I'm still actually kind of researching him on my own behind the scenes. Your interview with him, I thought, was very well done, honestly, and I feel that he came across as a credible guy. I don't know. I'm assuming that was your take on him.
Yeah,
he struck me as a believable individual, and not all of his information was direct, you know, as you were stating. So it's hard really to know, but I mean, I basically think that he sounds believable to me. I don't, you know, I'm hoping to speak to some other. I may want to speak to him myself, but I'm also doing a little bit of research dealing with him, and I don't really know other than to say he strikes me as believable.
Excellent. We had what's up with Richard Doty? He's a first-hand witness, isn't he? Yeah. What's your take on Richard Doty? Good guy, bad guy?
Yeah, Richard Doty. Yes, met him. He's I'll tell you right now, if you meet Richard Doty, it's difficult not to like the man. He's very civil. He's very polite. He's very nice, and thoughtful. He's all of those things, in fact. Now, the real question, though, is to what extent do we take him seriously? So a lot of people don't know his story. So Richard Doty was Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI. A lot of people believe he was also with CIA. That might have been his main thing. It's possible. Doty's had a lot of high-level people in the CIA provide very strong support for him. One of them was the late Richard Helms, former director of the CIA. It was a quote that Helms had about Doty, something like honorable man, great American, that type of thing. And I have no reason to doubt that was actually what Helms said. Now, we do know that in the early 1980s, Richard Doty had an interaction with Linda Moulton Howe, the researcher, where he invited her to Kirtland Air Force Base in 1983, where he showed Linda a series of documents similar to, but different from the MJ-12 documents that came out a year and a half later. In early 1983, no one had seen any released documents of any sort that were along those lines. But Richard Doty showed Linda Moulton Howe essentially what seemed like a presidential briefing paper dealing with this subject at a very deep conspiratorial level, similar to MJ-12. She wasn't allowed to photograph them. She wasn't allowed to write them down at the time. She had to do everything back when she got back to her hotel. The classic look but don't touch scenario, which is something that, you know, has happened in the intelligence field from many times. Was that an op? Yes, I think he was trying to, he was doing his job as an intelligence operative to try to throw some disinformation into the UFO field. So he has done that. It's also been stated that Richard Doty's own father was deep at Area 51 in that facility and knew a lot, and that Richard Doty himself was brought into that world and knew a lot. I personally believe he does know a lot, and I think that you know, there was a book that came out almost 20 years ago by Robert Collins called "Exempt from Disclosure," and that's an interesting book, by the way. Very interesting book. So when it was originally published, Richard Doty was listed as a co-author. And Doty was very unhappy about being listed there. Because what ended up happening is, what it seemed like is that a lot of the Doty's contributions came from email correspondence that he had had with Collins. The impression I got is that was none of it was meant to be published. So in that, he talked about seeing an alien on video, being interviewed. That's in the book, and that's from Doty. At the time that book came out, I wrote to Doty before I met him personally, and I said, "So what's the story about this?" And he said he wasn't very polite at that time, I must say. He was feeling a little stressed out. He said, "If you've been paying attention, you will know that I disavowed everything in there." And I wrote back, I said, "Yeah, I know you disavowed it, but that doesn't mean it isn't true." I mean, he were corresponding with Collins, but he wouldn't confirm that. But I think it's probably true. I think it's true.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, you know, the problem that you have with the UFO field is, you know, again, you were asking me, is someone trustworthy? And the question is, I don't think the proper question is so-and-so trustworthy? The question is their information true? And I think Richard Doty has said certain things that are absolutely true and other things that are questionable. And that's the case with probably everybody. So you just have to, every data point has got to be looked at individually on its own merits. I think that's the only way to go in this field.
Okay, excellent. We got I got a few more minutes with Richard Dolan. So here, what are Mr. Dolan's thoughts on the phenomenon and the experiences of Chris Bledsoe? Bledsoe has the backing of many from NASA and CIA.
He does, yeah. Well, what by the phenomenon, I'm not sure exactly what this gentleman means here. But I will just say overall, what I believe is happening is that our planet, our species, our world, we're being visited by, I think, multiple intelligences from probably with a variety of motivations and agendas. That's what I think. They may be from some other dimension of reality, and insofar as I can even understand what a dimension is. Do we really understand that? I'm not sure, but they take physical form when they're here. I don't think there's any question about that. In terms of what Chris Bledsoe went through, I did an extended interview with Chris a couple of years ago on my channel, and people can listen to it. I think 3 parts minimum. It might be a 4th part or more on my website. So I really got into some deep waters with Chris. And what we did was we walked through all of his experiences, and I tried to do it methodically in order. I think Chris was very forthcoming. I think he was I think he strikes anyone as very sincere and truthful, and I think he is truthful. Now, yeah, he's talked quite extensively about having a lot of interest by NASA and the CIA, who he's very, very pro CIA, by the way. He's very pro NASA, very pro CIA, which is a little jarring for someone like myself to hear that. But hey, that's his attitude. And but having said all of that, I can't say that I really understand what's going on with Chris Bledsoe's situation and his story. I can't say that I know for sure that everything is as it appears to be. It looks like it. And I can say that on a personal basis, I really like the man. He's someone that I think is warm and genuine. And I believe he's truthful. That's about all I can say.
Excellent.
I mean, his stories are astonishing, and they're not just UFO stories. You know, there are sightings of genuine craft, but there's also encounters with like what seems like the Virgin Mary. Essentially, he has a genuine Marian apparition in his accounts, and a lot of it is very overtly spiritual, and that's an important part of his story.
Okay. And Richard, do you still believe all 190 plus countries will keep their word to not use the most powerful weapon in the universe for war after another country, Venezuela, preparing to attack Guyana? Okay. If you get that.
Well, I don't know which is the most powerful weapon in the universe. Some
in the universe, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. This individual's not mentioning what that weapon would be, and I don't think that they necessarily have access to it. Like, I think one of the big reasons for the secrecy on UAP or UFOs is the technology. I'm not a fan of the secrecy, but if there's one area where I can understand why this is a secret, it's the weapons. It's not difficult to imagine that, and this is what Grush has said. David Grush actually said, behind the scenes, you have nations trying to weaponize this technology. And this is what, researchers like myself have been thinking for many years. This is not the first time we've discussed this matter, but you have someone like Grush essentially, can we say, confirming it. So the weaponization of the technology is critically important to understand. Like, you might trust yourself with such advanced technology, but would you trust your next door neighbor? Would you trust everyone in your city or everyone in your country or everyone in the world? There are people out there who are genuinely sociopathic, and you don't really know what they would do with some of these technologies and weapons if they had the ability to use them. Could you blow up the Pacific Ocean with some of this stuff? I mean, I don't really know how powerful it is. In the case of the example this gentleman uses, Venezuela and Guyana, I don't know that Venezuela has access to that technology. I mean, they are they've got oil resources and things like that, but I'm not sure that they have the ability to get this type of weaponry. But maybe the larger question is, if this all were to come out, what would happen? You were saying earlier, you had an opinion that, well, if we allow abundance to kind of come into play here, we might not have all these wars of aggression over resources. This is not the first time, people have made this argument, and I'm not saying there's no validity to it, but people have all kinds of reasons and ways of hating each other that are, I mean, maybe it's easier not to hate your neighbor when you got a full belly and you're not worried about your next meal. But, I think that it's very possible that we'll find other things to be angry about. We're very good at that.
We'll find a way. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for your time on this Friday night live. Thanks to all our live audience. Like I said, this is a record 2,620 people.
Awesome.
But we got one
last.
last.
Tell you, man, I loved hanging out here with you. I'll do this again.
We'll do one more. Thanks. Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
What do you think of the books called Allies of Humanity and the author Marshall Vian
Summers, yeah.
Heard of
Martian, yeah.
Summers, sorry.
Yeah. It's funny. I have the first 2 books of that. So The Allies of Humanity was written a little over 20 years ago. Marshall Summers is a man who this isn't exactly channeled information, but it's like that in the sense that he received what he feels were kind of a quiet communication. You could say a telepathic communication from a group that said, like, we're allies of you guys, but you're in trouble.
Hmm.
There are other groups out there that do not have your best interests in heart.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I've read parts of this. Yep.
yeah. So look alive, wake up, and recognize what's happening. That's essentially the message.
Hmm.
So what I would say is that's actually a very reasonable message. And that could be an absolutely true message. I suspect it's true. I mean, is it true that Marshall Summers got a telepathic communication? Well, 20 years ago, I was much less willing to accept that that might have been the case. Now, hey, look, I'm married to a really first-rate remote viewer. And I've talked with a lot of people who do a lot of those types of activities, and they are good at what they do. And that's no joke. That's a real skill. We human beings have abilities that we kind of got into the habit of denying over the last few centuries, but we've got them. I'm quite convinced. There's a reality beyond these little wet brains of ours. There's some kind of, I believe personally, that there's a consciousness that goes beyond us, and we can connect to it in various ways. This is a personal belief. I could be wrong, but it's what I think. So I think of Marshall Summers. Could he have been legit? And yes, I think absolutely that could be legit. And I do think the message in there is well presented.
Okay, and then you're so experienced. We're definitely going to have you on the show again, Richard. So awesome, man. You know so much. As to you've been looking at this last. This is the last question, last one. For so many years, you've been looking at this, and now this information appears to be coming out, right? Obviously, we want to verify it, make sure it's true.
Yeah.
What's been the most or the biggest surprise for you, or as they're peeling away the curtain, is it really just exactly what you thought, or is there
No, it's very different. It's surreal. It's weird. It's a weird experience for me. That's the truth. Like, I started this in the early 90s when the subject was still like, I left the academic world for this subject. Like, I was going to be a teacher at a university. That was my goal. Hell, I was a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship a million years ago. Like, my whole path was I was going to be in a university setting, king of the classroom, teach a course in American history, whatever. And then I fell into UFOs, but I had to leave that world because UFOs were just so unacceptable. So from that starting point where I was for several years researching this before I even told anyone that I was researching it, to now at a point where it is much more out in the open. And a lot of the things that I have been saying for years are turning out to be true. And I can definitely say I was ahead of the curve on a lot of the things that are being discussed today. I talked about 10, 20 years ago, quite openly, about things that are happening. But having said that, there are things that it's surreal for me. I think the biggest thing that I was not expecting, I kind of hinted at before, which is this kind of slow walking of disclosure. So the information, some bombshells come out, but the establishment is hanging on really well. They're playing a great game of chess here. And I suspect that the thing that they did that I didn't predict back in, say, 2010, is how solidly they're able to control big tech. So in other words, the legacy media they've had in their pocket for years. The Washington Post, you might as well just be reading a statement out of the CIA. But with big tech, Facebook, YouTube, even all of these, those were not under much censorious control back in 2010 as they are today. It's much different now. There's still a lot of pushback from the people, But big tech definitely has gone over to the dark side in a lot of ways. I mean, it's very, very, you see, COVID made it very obvious that certain things are not to be discussed at all. And with the UFO subject, it's not as bad, but the whole conspiracy angle is still off limits. So it's a weird thing, like where we're seeing this information is out, but it's not being discussed. It's really not being discussed in an honest way for the most part. And I'm not blaming the members of Congress for that. They're doing their best. But the establishment that they are bumping up against is very, very powerful. I guess the other thing I'll say is I didn't quite expect to see this breakthrough that we've been having for these past few years. I will fully admit it caught me by surprise. I didn't expect it, but I'm glad it's happened. Part of me saw it as inevitable. I just didn't think it would happen when it did. I thought it would be much further down the road. So here we are, and we're living through it. We're going to live through a very, very major drama, a great drama in our lives. We get to see it.
I mean, it's going to be so exciting. Thanks again, Richard.
Exciting, or hopefully not disappointing, but maybe exciting.
Okay, everyone in the audience, please check out Richard Dolan. He has a great YouTube channel. You can just search for his name and also his website. He had a great article today. You can read more eloquently his points if you go check out that article. So thanks again for everyone for being here. Thanks for being at the show. Please like and subscribe and support on patreon.com/Chris Lato or become a YouTube member. And we'll see you next week. Have a great day. Peace.